Let me cross check. Raz, are you back and can you start recording?
Hello there, Job. Hello there, Narayan. Thank you so much. And this is Job's second session of the Global Automation Bootcamp. So thank you once again, Job. And today you'll be sharing PowerShell with Power Automate. And yes, we are live. We are recording. And once again, thank you, Job.
No problem at all. Happy to be back today. So let's get started and don't waste any time. So my name is Jaap Brasser. I'm a senior developer advocate, but my background is more on the system engineering side, and that's also where I grew my love for PowerShell. Because in the end, what we don't want to be doing is repeating ourselves and having to click through or type through the same task day after day after day. And I think that's also how I ended up with the Power Platform and Power Automate. So what I'll be talking about today is a couple of things. So first, I'll give a bit of an introduction of this talk itself. My presentation will be littered with pictures of Amsterdam because we had snow last weekend, which was very exciting. But unfortunately, it was just for a single weekend. But at least we have the pictures. So after the intro, I'll talk a bit about Power Automate, how I got started with it, and how we can use it for different tasks of automation. Then we'll go into PowerShell. I'm going to assume that people know what PowerShell is. If not, I'll briefly introduce that. Then we'll go over to demos, and at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So I hope that's what everyone was expecting. So with that, let's head over to the introduction. So for me, the reason I started working on this session and why it resonated with me personally is the fact that obviously Power Automate and PowerShell have matching names, but there were a couple of other options for me to choose from, because we have Power Apps, it's part of the Power Platform, Power BI, Power Virtual Agent. So there would have been plenty of options. I think the most unlikely candidate would be PowerPoint, as the integrations for Power Automate and PowerPoint are unfortunately not fantastic. I've in the past tried to do a bit of automation with automatically generating slides based on any kind of events happening in Office 365, but it's reasonably painful to get anything proper built up. So I've actually been using Power Automate for a couple of years already, since it was still called Microsoft Flow. So when I started with it, I was a bit doe-eyed, and I thought, well, this is going to be an easy transition. I already know a bit of PowerShell, so I should be able to just one-on-one map the kind of skills I have there and use it on Microsoft Flow / Power Automate. But there were some challenges with that approach, because I was using my standard workflow, what I would do with PowerShell, and that is whenever I wanted to do something in my on-premises environment, what I would do, I would get all users, or I would scope it to a specific group, or I would get all computers, or just anything I would want to run a check against, or I want to change some properties, or just validate that something is still in place. And then for each of those, I want to take an item. And if I was feeling really fancy, what I would do is I would also implement logging, and I would make sure that that we would have sufficient logging, we would have verbose logs, and any kind of action that I would take or any failure of any action would be properly logged. So I initially what I started to do was use the same approach on the Power Platform. Just try to get everything that you can. scope it, make sure that you only make the changes or get the data from the groups that you want, and then take the action and write some log files. Well, one of the nice things of Power Automate is, of course, that there's already extensive logging available, so you don't have to do anything yourself to ensure that all actions are being logged. Because the default setting is that there's going to be logging available. So what we get to is, if I wanted to use this same kind of approach, the approach that I was used to from my regular scripting, how does it scale? How can I apply this to Power Automate, and what kind of issues did I ran into when I attempted to do so? So with that, that brings us to Power Automate, and I'll give a bit of background, even though it's my assumption that most people in here are going to be aware of what Power Automate does. I'm just going to give the ground level overview of what Power Automate is and what kind of strengths it has, and building on top of that, the kind of mistakes I made when I initially started using it, and started using it as if it was just another scripting language. So the first thing in Power Automate is going to be the connectors. So there's a great number of connectors available, and these definitely simplify our lives a lot more. That was one of the things that I found most appealing when I got started with Power Automate, was the fact that if I wanted to get something out of an Office 365 mailbox, compared to how I used to do that in an on-premises environment, it really simplified things, because it allows you to filter on any incoming mail, filter on specific properties of that mail. For example, does it have an attachment, or is this a calendar invite, or is it sent from or to a specific group? And that was a real eye opener for me, how simplistic your initial code is going to be if you want to get started with automation. Because mind you, all of these things are of course possible to code yourself in PowerShell, or if you wanted to, you could do the same in VB script. But in order to be able to do that, you'd easily hit 100 lines of code just to extract an email or an attachment out of an email. And part of the downside of that is also that if you wanted to do that, in order to get the information out of Exchange or out of Outlook, you would have to be able to connect, to authenticate, and this is something that is also simplified and is done for you by the Power Apps platform, because the moment you start using one of the connectors, it authenticates for you. The fact that you're already authenticated, you already know what kind of objects you'll be working with. You know what kind of objects you can expect back. And there's also a level of error handling built into all of these connectors, and they continuously evolve and get new functionality, get new bug fixes, performance increases. So this takes away the part of having to go all of your own code, and you can focus more on the logic. So that is obviously a very good thing. Next up is the fact that there's many templates available. This screenshot is very much out of date, but what I was describing of, for example, saving an attachment, when I used to do this in an on-premises environment, I would have to hook into an Outlook COM object. If you don't know what an Outlook COM object is, you're blessed, because it's an absolute pain to work with, and to handle all the exceptions, and to ensure that it loads and unloads correctly. And also, it's not meant for the kind of automation that Power Automate allows us to do. So what I mean with it, it's not meant to facilitate the kind of automation. Whenever you're using the Outlook COM object, it's intended for interactive use. So if you wanted to run this for your department, you would basically have to have Outlook running on a server or on your system continuously, just so you would be able to do that kind of automation. And with Power Automate, everything runs within the Power Automate platform, so you don't have to have an interactive logon just to be able to have your automations run. So that's definitely a step up, and that's just one of the examples, because there's thousands or tens of thousands of templates available, and which you can create yourself as well, which simplifies and gives you a lot of flexibility with the different kind of automations that you can do within the platform. So with that, we end up with PowerShell, and if it wasn't obvious already, PowerShell is what makes me happy. So here's a bunch of happy trees in the Central Park in Amsterdam, the Vondelpark. So if we want to start using PowerShell within Power Automate, how can we do that? What kind of options do we have available? So this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but there are a couple of different ways that we can start integrating PowerShell into what we do with Power Automate. So, for example, what you can do is there's three main categories. You can choose to run your PowerShell, I'd say, quote unquote, locally, but of course the code could be running anywhere. And whatever your scripts do, either in your on-premises environment or anywhere within Azure or Office 365, make sure that your output ends up on OneDrive. Another way is to use the Power Apps gateway, which also provides you with a way to directly interact with the Power Platform. There's Azure Automation. There was a great session about it this morning. I'm not exactly sure what the title was, but after the session I'll make sure that I link that one, because there were a lot of examples of how you can use Azure Automation. And the advantage of Azure Automation is that you can either choose to run your PowerShell code directly in Azure using the Cloud Runbook workers, but you can also choose to deploy those workers in your own environment. So by doing so, you have a way to execute code in your on-premise environment and to send back whatever the results directly back into Azure Automation. The nice thing about this is you get the flexibility of being able to do both, and you can also directly call this from Power Automate. And the last one, Azure Functions, it shouldn't be a strange name to you, because the previous session was completely about Azure Functions. The main advantage here is your Azure Functions can run almost instantly. It's a serverless platform. So what Azure Functions provides for PowerShell is a number of things, but what is important for us being Power Automate users is the fact that you don't have to worry about where your code is running if your the system that's running it is up to date. You just have a way to store your code and to directly execute your code. So with that being said, Azure Functions is definitely my favorite way of integrating my favorite way of integrating PowerShell into Power Automate. In the meantime, I see that there's some questions in the chat, so I'll pick them up as I go. So Praful, is reading or sending email Outlook possible using PowerShell code, or do we need to use Power Apps or Power Automate? So it's possible with both. So if you want to do it with Outlook, with a local account, or with an email account that is not part of Office 365, then you'll be able to do it. Run it on your own system or any system that has Outlook installed. You can directly connect to. You can make a connection with the Outlook COM object, and you can do pretty much anything, but it is a painful process. So if you want an easier way of automating anything mail related, I would definitely recommend the Power Platform, or alternatively the Graph API to interact with it directly. Second question, can we use PowerShell to send CSV to a SharePoint list? Yes, you can do that in a number of ways. If you just want to upload the file, then you can just drag and drop directly into your browser, into the document library. If you want to take some kind of action on your on the items in the CSV list, for example, you want to apply certain labels to certain files, or you want to add users, you want to manage permissions, whatever depending what you have in your CSV, you'll be able to do that using PowerShell. The way you would do that is by using the SharePoint module to connect to your environment and then take whatever action you want to take there. Excellent. So I'll go a little bit more into the different ways that we can use PowerShell. So the most obvious and the one that most of you will be familiar with is going to be just running PowerShell locally. So what I have here, it might not look entirely familiar, but this is running PowerShell 7 in the Windows terminal. So there's a couple of advantages to using the Windows terminal as compared to using just using Windows PowerShell or running PowerShell in a regular console. And that's the fact that first you can set your own background. So in my case, I have a happy Roxy in the corner, which cheers me up whenever I can't figure out why my PowerShell code isn't running. The other advantage is that it supports Unicode, so you can read and write the Unicode characters, and they will display correctly. And this is especially useful if you're from a non-English speaking country where there's symbols that are not part of the default set of characters. Then most likely you've seen this when that it gets replaced by a weird combination of characters instead of, for example, an E with a pointy comma on top of it, for example. So Windows Terminal is highly recommended if you want to do any kind of PowerShell development. If it is a system on which you can't install anything, then I would recommend that you use the PowerShell ISE. ISE stands for Integrated Scripting Environment. So you can use this to help you write some scripts that are longer than a single line. The advantage of using a scripting editor is you get tab completion. It will tell you whenever there's an error in your code, so you don't have to run it to find out that you made an oopsie. And anyone that wrote any code ever knows that there's going to be a lot of oopsies whenever you write anything. So that's very helpful. If you do have the chance to install something, install VS Code. It's where all Microsoft delivery is going. All Microsoft development is going, and that is the place where you want to be if you if you want to be serious about developing PowerShell code and making sure that that you have the most up-to-date platform. If you one thing that that running PowerShell locally provides you that I didn't hit on yet is there are a lot of PowerShell modules available to connect to the different parts of Azure, Office 365, or SharePoint, Exchange, whatever you want to connect to. There's going to be a module available for you, and that's also the case for the Power Apps platform. One of the things that you need to be aware of that there is, of course, different versions of PowerShell. In this case, I'm running PowerShell 7.12, which currently is the most up-to-date stable version. But if you never installed PowerShell and you would press the Windows key on your system now, then most likely, and you are actually on a Windows system, if you would type PowerShell, you would see that if you're on a 64-bit system, that you will have 4 options available. You'll have Windows PowerShell, Windows PowerShell x86, and then the ISE, the scripting editor, twice. So that is Windows PowerShell, and this is just PowerShell. So the main difference between this is that if you're running PowerShell, so anything with a version later than 6, most recently 7, that is going to be the cross-platform version of PowerShell. So that is great, the fact that it's cross-platform. So you can also run it on Mac, you can also run it on Linux. That is awesome. The downside of this is that there are some compatibility issues with some of the official Microsoft modules. So this is something that is actively being worked on. But if you ever run into a scenario where you get a strange error that says it cannot load a certain DLL or anything like that, try to run the same command in Windows PowerShell, and you might have a better experience. If it still doesn't work, at the end of the session, I'll have my Twitter handle out. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to help you out. By the way, I always tell people that I'll be happy to help them out, but almost never does anyone reach out to me on Twitter. So make me less lonely. Just ask me a question, even though you might have solved it already. I'll have someone to talk to. So that was running PowerShell code locally. The other option is to run it in Azure Automation. So Azure Automation provides us with a number of benefits. So I already mentioned that you could run it either on premises or in the cloud, but it also allows you to run your code cross-platform. Not so much your PowerShell code, as the highest supported PowerShell version for Azure Automation is 5.1, so that's the last version of Windows PowerShell. Which is great because that means that all the Power Automate and all the Office 365 modules are going to be supported by that. But it also provides you with a way to schedule the code to run, and scheduling your code to run can be done in a number of ways. You can either use some kind of trigger that whenever a request comes in, that your automation will be triggered. But you could also do it in a simpler way, just say, I want this to run every night at this time. And it provides you with a lot of opportunities for automation. The downside of it is that it is not instantaneous, so it can take a little while for one of your jobs to run. So it depends what kind of automation you're expecting to be doing. If you want something that is part of a long-running automation flow, and you want to make sure that whatever action you're running, I'm going to give an example. For example, you want to you have a Power Automate flow that's going to check a configuration over a number of servers. Azure Automation would be a good choice there, because it's very well suited for long-running tasks and for configuration management. If, however, you're looking for a quick bit of PowerShell code to be executed, we're going to very quickly end up with the other alternative. And the other alternative in this case is Azure Functions. So Azure Functions have also been around for a couple of years already. And what Azure Functions provide us, let's see if I can have a good one sentence summary. It provides us with a place where we can store and execute our code without having to care about any of the infrastructure. I think that's the shortest way I can describe it. So what Azure Functions gives us, it all runs within Azure. It's in the name. It provides us with a place where we can store our configuration for our Azure Functions, but also the specific code. And this session is about PowerShell. PowerShell is one of the languages that we can use in Azure Functions. But if you are more familiar with Python, you can run your Python code, you can run your C#, you can run your JS in there. It's all within the possibilities. The easiest way to integrate your Azure Functions with anything you do in Power Automate is by creating an Azure function that is triggered by a web request. And the reason for that is that you could simply call it with an HTTP request. Your Power Automate flow will wait for the response, and then you can continue to work with whatever your Azure function spits out. So one of the reasons that I like to use Azure Functions is that in Power Automate, there's a number of ways to work with the kind of data you get back. So Power Automate is very strong with working with structured data, and this is something that PowerShell also excels with, because anything in PowerShell is all an object. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter what kind of code you run. It will always return an object. The object might be a string, but it could also be a custom object, or whatever kind of command you run, that type of object will be returned. So because of that, using Power Automate and PowerShell as a combination to each other works in favor of both of their strengths. One of the things that Power Automate is less good at is, for example, and this goes back to what I was saying before, my standard workflow whenever I work with PowerShell is get whatever items I want to take action on, take those items and do whatever kind of action. So gather information, set information, change some settings, whatever your task is, and then make sure that all your successes and failures are going to be logged. And depending on how you do your logging, you could either opt for human readable logging, or you could opt for a structured log, for example, adding lines to a CSV file, or spitting out JSON objects with a number of properties like messages, error codes, and have a way to parse that. So in case you're using either CSVs or JSONs or JSON as an output format for your logs, then Power Automate is going to be very happy with it, because it can just convert that data into structured objects that it understands, and then you can just filter based on whatever is in there. But once you get to the point where you have this massive text file, it's stored on your OneDrive, for example. Like, for example, let me go back a couple of slides. So, if we would be integrating PowerShell by outputting whatever you do in PowerShell to OneDrive, and you would want Power Automate to take action based on whatever output is there. So if, for example, you're facilitating a migration, you've written a couple of scripts for that. Part of the migration is going to be local, part of it will be in the cloud. And based on whatever is in this plain text log, you want Power Automate to act on this. So it is relatively easy to get Power Automate to take action on whatever you do on OneDrive, because there is a trigger. If there's a change to a certain folder or a certain file, you can trigger your Power Automate flow. But if you chose to have nice human readable logs, it will be significantly harder for Power Automate to act on that, because a simple string of text is not something that Power Automate likes. There are some ways around it that you can split it in particular ways. But this would be one of the cases where using an Azure function to grab the important parts, or the parts you want to take action on directly from whatever log file or whatever plain text data, using a simple PowerShell script, and to feed that back into Power Automate, if that makes sense. Another thing you can use your Azure functions for, if there is something that is not supported in Power Automate. So an example is you want to get some information about things in your calendar, because you're trying to simplify your daily workflow, and you want to ensure that all the data that is connected to your calendar invites is going to be stored as well. So I mentioned the workflow before, where you can take any email that comes into a mailbox and then automatically save the attachment to a folder. If you wanted to do the same for every calendar event that's created, you'll quickly find out that the connectors in Power Automate, they do not allow you to save the attachments to the calendar items. And the reason for that is, well, the property is not available. There are some requests open for that to get that fixed in a later release. So if you're watching this recording 6 months from now, please point out to me that it now is in there. But currently, that's not the case. So if you want to do it, you'll have to find a different way of getting this data. So this is where Azure Functions comes into play, and where it can allow you to add additional functionalities that are not available to Power Automate itself. So Azure Functions is one of the ways you could do this. There's of course other ways. You could create a custom connector to do this for you. You could even have a custom connector that talks directly to your Azure function. Or if you want to have a more direct approach, you could also directly do your Graph API calls from Power Automate and gather your data from there. So there's a number of ways you can do this, and some of them are directly using PowerShell in Azure Functions. Other might be a number of web requests, which could be executed using PowerShell, but could also be with any other kind of scripting language. So with that out of the way, what we'll be doing is going to take a look at some of the different ways that we can interact with Power Automate and Azure Functions, and also how we can do this from VS Code. So let me just quickly check the chat if there's any questions right now. Okay, that all looks good. Let me know if my screen is going to be big enough, because I have a high resolution screen, so it might not translate well to Microsoft Teams. Go. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to first take a look at Power Automate and look at some of how we can work around some of the limitations with the number of objects not being what you would expect, and how you can work around this. So with that, we'll jump into this one. So one of the things, if we want to take a look at a number of log files that are available in your OneDrive, I have a very simple flow here. So the first one is whenever an HTTP request is received. So, well, that's always an easy one. The reason I usually choose for HTTP request for my Power Automate flows is that I can just kick it off from anywhere. I can either have another flow call this one, or whenever I want to call it locally, I can open up PowerShell and just run this code directly. So the next step is that it's going to take a look at the number of robocopy logs. So we can see we just list all the files in the folder. And what we'll do here is we'll first set the threshold to 10 and then save that one again. Then we're going to take a look at what kind of output we'll be getting from this. So we'll just give it a second to run. And once it's completed, we can just look at the outputs here, get a bunch of IDs there. You can see how many objects we have. So I'll do a quick search here. You can see that there are 20 IDs found. Let's see, yes. So there's an output of 20 files here. If we want to make sure that we get all our files, what we can do is we can change this within limits. We can tell it to return a certain number of items. The upside is that in this case, list items in folder supports pagination, but if we would use a different action here, so let's take a look at the OneDrive for business, and then we're going to search for files, find files in folder. We'll have to enter a number of things. So we have to choose whether we do a OneDrive search or a pattern. In this case, a pattern would be a regular expression pattern. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, if you can, keep it that way, because it's hardly ever fun to use regular expressions. Let's see, we're going to demo robocopy, and we're going to use the example. It is not really participating right now. Let's do it again. I think it might be the zoom level that is. I'll zoom right back in afterwards. Yes, Now it's working as expected. So we use the example folder. So in this case, looking at the results here, we can see that all those files are called reconcile. So let's do a query. We'll just look for files that are called reconcile. We're using a pattern. So what this means is that, I'll briefly show this in PowerShell. It's big enough. So we'll have hello, I'm Jaap, reconcile. So just to show what a regular expression would do, if we would try to match this sentence, then it would match because I make any typos. So if I run this, it says true. If we have multiple sentences, for example, just one with Jaap and just one with global power automate bootcamp. Now the PowerShell behavior will change because now instead of returning true, it's going to tell us which sentence actually has the word reconcile in there. So we can see it matches. So in case you're not familiar with regular expressions, the easiest way to imagine that this kind of matching works is just by seeing it like this. So star reconcile star. So that's the type of matching that is being used here. So going back to Power Automate, we now have this option set up. Let's close this one out. Get rid of the list files in folder. And take a look at the advanced options. So we can see, okay, how many files can we return? So let's change that to 100. Save it. And we can just run it by using the previous trigger. I'll zoom it in again. So we can now see that if we take a look at the number of IDs returned, this will tell us how many items. You can see ID is in there 100 times. So if we look at number of files, 100, that leads me to think that there might be more files in there if it's exactly 100 files. So let's switch over to OneDrive. Let's search. Let's see how many results we get. We'll give it a second to run. Or I'm going to be impatient and I'm not going to wait for it. Because I know the answer, it's 141. And if we click all of them, how many do I have? It's 77. Well, that's not accurate because there's more. So I know it's about, I think actually 141 or 142. So let's just make certain that we're going to be able to return all these results. So instead of 100, we're going for 200. And now what you can see is that it immediately fails. So this is of course documented, and it will also tell us why. So we get a status code 400, anything other than something that starts with 200 is not a good status code. So it tells us the provided value max file count is not valid. So the maximum number of files to return would be 100. Okay, well, that's a bit of a disappointment because we're already limited to 100 items, and in this case, that is less than we would want. So if we look at settings, we also don't have any possibility to make this more than 100. So whenever you're going to be working with a folder that has more than 100 items, you're immediately limited by your connector. So this would be a case where using an Azure function would be beneficial, or by finding a different way to get this information out of Power Automate. So For example, a different way of getting this information would in this case be to use the Graph API. And if we want to use a Graph API call to do this instead, then first of all, we need to have a user set up that can, or rather an app registration set up that can perform these requests. And what it then does, it authenticates against the Graph API, and it gives you a bit more flexibility there. Another way you could do this is by having an Azure function that you would call that would take a look at a certain folder. It would authenticate against Office 365. It would run the code. It would list the files, and it would then just return the information that you want. So that is this is an actual case that I ran into in my environment, that whenever I want to take a look at log files of whatever kind of application that happens to be logging to OneDrive, I couldn't find I couldn't get more than 100 files using the find files in folder. And you can try to do batches, but if there's nothing more specific than this query that you can give, maybe you can put a date time behind it, if that's included in the file name. But very quickly, 100 results is not that much. So that can bring you to the point where you have to use Azure Functions. So see that I have 14 minutes left, so let's use that to jump over to Azure Functions and to see what we can do with that. So first of all, if you paid attention in the previous session, you can see that sorry? Okay. What you can see is that there's a number of, if we go to function apps, we're in Power Automation Bootcamp function, and we can see that there's functions available. In this case, we have a single function called PowerShell HTTP web trigger. And if we take a look at that one, we first get a notification. Let me zoom it in a little bit. So it says the app is currently in read-only mode. It seems like a warning, but this is actually what we want it to be. Because the reason for this is whenever I write functions, I don't want them to I don't want to go into this interface to interact with them. So what I prefer to do is, let's go back there. What I prefer to do is to write my code directly in VS Code. So let's take a look at the code we have here. So you can see this is a very simple one. It's one of the baseline baseline PowerShell functions that are out there. We have a status code and we have a body in which we put some information. And we can see that if we would actually want to run this, it would fail, and that is great because then we can fix it. Because we see, if we take a look at this function, we get an internal server error. So let's switch over to my VS Code. We have run.psn1. So that is the same file that we just saw here, but it's locally in my VS Code. And we can take a look. The nice thing about VS Code is it gives us some indication when something is wrong. So here I see that there's an error. And we get this error that says, we're missing a square bracket at the end of an attribute or type literal. So let's click it. It will go there. There's no quick fix available, but I happen to know that I can just fix this by putting this behind there. And now that we closed off the PS custom object, let's just output this again as a JSON file, JSON format. We save it, and we now saved it locally. So obviously it's not on Azure yet. So what we do is we press F1, we choose deploy to function app, and we just deploy it back. We get a warning because we will overwrite whatever is in there, which is fine because what's in there is this script. So it's currently running. Let's open up the output window so we can see what's happening here. So basically, in a nutshell, what's happening here, it will zip up all the code. So there's a number of functions here. We have run.psn1. We have a couple of JSON files that specify the configuration and which function is for what. See that the deployment is complete. And if we now go back here and would refresh this, I would expect to see that the body object is now complete again. There we go. Our square bracket is there, and the convert to JSON part is also there. So let's just test it. I'm not going to send any body in there. There we go. All right, it still throws an error. Not sure what it's upset about. PS custom. Ah, nice. I accidentally put another error in there, or intentionally, but I definitely accidentally did that. Accidentally put a B in the wrong place. So I mean, it was almost correct. So let's redeploy this one and deploy. So this will take a little bit of time. Let's go over the error so we can talk to what was happening there. So we can see that it did go further than with the previous request, but in this case, the initial error that came up here is that it cannot find this type. And the moment I saw it, I saw this B should be a little bit to the right, so I moved it over to the right now. And if everything went well, we would be able to refresh this now, and we would get the correct output. So I'd also like to note that all the code that we are now executing from the portal, we could also just directly do that from VS Code, but I just want to showcase that it's not smoke and mirrors and that we're actually deploying function apps directly from VS Code. So a couple of things that you need for this, I'll go over that in a second. So we get the following output. So we get a nice JSON object that says the function output is a message, and the message is this triggered function executed successfully. So yeah, we're happy with the result because we get some output. It is JSON output, so we could actually directly use this back into our Power Automate flows. And quickly back to VS Code. So what we need is this button. So it's called Azure, and this is the Azure plugin. So the moment you install this plugin, you're going to authenticate against Azure, and from that moment on, you can simply click here whenever you want to create a new Azure function. You can make all the changes. You can create as many triggers, as many functions within a single function app, and whenever you're ready to deploy to test it in the cloud instead of testing it locally, you can just choose the deploy option. So in this case, Azure Functions deploy to function app. With that, we're on the 5-minute mark. So with that, I would like to give it back to everyone there. Do you have any questions? If you don't have any questions, you have 5 minutes now to run to the bathroom before the next session picks up. Let me check the chat. So I don't see any questions there. If any questions pop up, I'll put my contact details. I'll put my contact details in the chat.
Thank you once again, Job. Always a great. And again, thank you for supporting the community in learning and mentoring people to get started with PowerShell. Again, it really was timely. So Remember to connect with Job, who's kindly offered to help support you and obviously mentor. So make sure you do connect with Job. Job, what do you prefer as a connection method? Is it Twitter or is it LinkedIn?
For me, Twitter or LinkedIn. I check them both. If you want me to answer using your last name, use LinkedIn. If you want an answer with a GIF in there, then probably use Twitter.
Got you. Yeah, awesome. So so there you go, guys. So Job's going to share the information in the chat window there, so that's great. So Job, so I know you've been doing a lot of things in the community. Do you have anything additional to share about what you've been up to?
Well, it's been a lot of virtual stuff, as for everyone. What I've mostly been active with is I'm leading 2 user groups, virtual user groups in the Netherlands. One of them is the DevOps and DevOps and GitHub community that I run together with Barbara, who was also speaking here this morning. And the other one is the PowerShell community. So if you would like to get in touch with some people that are also interested in PowerShell, or you would like to reach out, we actually have a session coming up on Tuesday. So I'll link it in the chat. It's going to be completely in English, and we have some cool stuff about notifications and using Azure DevOps. So it's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming up there, and that's on Tuesday.
Fantastic. Excellent job. So again, thank you, Job, for that. Great session. Always great to have you. So there you go. So that was Job. So